I would have been glad to have had a steamboat or railroad collision, or any other accident happen, by which I might have received a temporary injury sufficient to make me ineligible to enter the academy.
That is Ulysses S. Grant. He is 17 years old, he is on his way to West Point, and he is hoping for a wreck. No accident came. He had to face the music. This is the story of the 4 years the future general spent trying to get out of the Army, before it ever occurred to anyone, least of all him, that he might be great at it.
Welcome back to the Living Archive. Last time, we left a gentle boy from Georgetown, Ohio, on a train he only half wanted to be on, headed to a school he was sure he'd fail out of. Same promise as before. The historical figures here, Grant included, are generated by AI, but every word he speaks, he actually wrote in the memoir he finished as he was dying. Where the record is thin or the story is legend, we'll tell you. What happened next were 4 years almost no one would have marked as the start of anything, least of all him. Let's go up the Hudson.
In the middle of May 1839, he took a steamboat east and let the slow canal carry him the last of the way, in no hurry at all to arrive.
I reported at West Point on the 30th or 31st of May, and about 2 weeks later passed my examination for admission, without difficulty, very much to my surprise.
Because West Point was not built as a school. It was the Revolution's great lock on the Hudson, the fortress that kept the British fleet from cutting the young country in two. And in 1780, the man who commanded the place, Benedict Arnold, tried to hand it to the enemy. The plot missed by a hair. The most loyal soldier the Union would ever have learned his trade on the exact ground of the most famous betrayal in American history. And the school on that rock was almost brand new. It's easy to picture West Point as ancient, gray stone, centuries of tradition. It wasn't. When Sam Grant walked through the gate in 1839, the academy was 37 years old, younger than many of the officers teaching in it. The men who would command the deadliest war in American history were trained at a school scarcely older than their own fathers.
A military life had no charms for me, and I had not the faintest idea of staying in the Army even if I should be graduated, which I did not expect.
The summer encampment that opened every cadet's career, the drilling, the tents, the discipline, landed on him like a sentence.
When the 28th of August came, I felt as though I had been at West Point always, and that if I stayed to graduation, I would have to remain always.
Except, everything you have just heard him say, he wrote as a dying man, looking back across 45 years, a general, a president, racing a cancer to finish his book. But we have something else. We have a letter he wrote at the time, in September 1839, weeks after he arrived, a homesick 17-year-old writing to his cousin. It is the earliest letter of his that survives, and the boy does not sound miserable at all.
Decidedly the most beautiful place that I have ever seen. Here are hills and dales, rocks and river, all pleasant to look upon. I do love the place. It seems as though I could live here forever, if my friends would only come too.
So which one is telling the truth? The old soldier who says a military life had no charms for him, or the boy who wrote home that he loved the place and could live there forever? Probably both. That is what memory does. The dying man remembered himself as more miserable than the boy actually was. He had arrived under a name that wasn't his. The congressman who nominated him had misremembered it, and, knowing the family, guessed the middle initial stood for Simpson, his mother's maiden name. It never did. But the paperwork stuck. Ulysses S. Grant. On the plane, the other cadets read the initials US, called him Uncle Sam, and then just Sam. Hiram Ulysses Grant of Georgetown was gone. For the rest of his life in the Army, he would be Sam Grant. And nothing about him drew the eye. He was slight and shy, a quiet boy who blushed easily and said little, one of the smallest cadets in his class. He would grow half a foot before he left. Of everyone on that plane, he was among the last anyone would have marked for greatness. That is the whole trick of him. Watch how easy he is to overlook. His roommate was a Maine boy named Rufus Ingalls, a friendship that would last the rest of their lives and follow Grant all the way to the end of the war. It's worth stopping on what West Point was in 1839. Today, it's one of the most selective academies in the country, a name that opens doors for a lifetime. Then, it was a free education, a striving father grabbed precisely because he couldn't afford any other. And the army it fed was startlingly small. The entire United States Army numbered only about 8,600 men, scattered in forts at the edge of the map, smaller than a single modern division. A commission in 1839 wasn't a ticket to glory. It was a steady government job, a long way from home. He was not alone in wanting out. In these years, much of the country wanted West Point gone. To Jacksonian America, it looked like an aristocracy, a privileged officer class, trained at public expense while the common man got nothing. More than once, Congress moved to abolish it outright.
A bill was discussed abolishing the military academy. I saw in this an honorable way to obtain a discharge. I was selfish enough to favor the bill.
Sit with that. He sat in his room on the Hudson, reading the debates, rooting for the Army's own school to be abolished, so he could go home. He did not throw himself at his studies.
I did not take hold of my studies with avidity. In fact, I rarely ever read over a lesson the second time during my entire cadetship.
What he did do was read books, not the textbooks, but the novels.
Much of the time, I am sorry to say, was devoted to novels, but not those of a trashy sort. I read all of Bulwer's then published, Cooper's, Marryat's, Scott's, Washington Irving's works, Lever's.
And there was one class that has surprised people ever since. West Point trained engineers and, oddly, artists. Its drawing master was the romantic painter Robert Walter Weir, and Cadet Grant was his student. Several of the drawings and watercolors he made here still survive. The man history remembers for the bloodiest army it ever raised could sit quietly with a brush and render a landscape. The same summer Grant would graduate, Weir finished his own masterpiece, The Embarkation of the Pilgrims, and hung it in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, where it still is. A painting made a few yards from these cadets now sits at the center of the national story. But nothing about the place came easy to a boy like him, because West Point in these years ran on the most exacting machine in American education, the merit and demerit system built by Sylvanus Thayer, the man they called the father of the military academy. Every hour scheduled, every button counted, every lateness marked against you. It was exactly the kind of clockwork the free-roaming Ohio boy could not love. In one column above all others, he finished near the bottom. Conduct. Not for any real mischief, his demerits were the small frictions of a boy who could never quite be tidy or punctual enough. A late formation, a coat unbuttoned, a musket out of line at inspection. He was no rebel. He was simply a young man the machine could never quite catch hold of. And yet he was, by every account, wonderful company. His junior year roommate, George Deshawn, second in the class, a man who would end his life a Catholic priest, remembered a night past Taps when the two of them were cooking a hash of potatoes and butter stolen from the mess over the coals of the grate in their room, with friends waiting outside to come and eat it. Word came up that the inspector was on his rounds. They shoved the pan under the bed, threw half a pail of water on the fire to kill the smell, and when the officer walked in through the steam and demanded to know what was going on, Sam Grant told him, perfectly straight, that the fire had been intolerable and they were cooling it. The inspector believed him. Half a century later, Deshawn still remembered one more thing about his old roommate. Grant never forgot his friends. Another classmate, Samuel French, remembered a monstrous heirloom pocket watch, 4 inches across, that the cadets passed hand to hand as a joke. Grant happened to be holding it, hidden in his coat, when he was called up to recite in engineering. Halfway through, the thing began to sound, French said, like a Chinese gong. The professor, baffled, had the classroom door shut, which only made it louder. And Grant, without breaking stride, simply kept reciting until he had outlasted it. 20 years later, Samuel French would be a Confederate general fighting Sam Grant at Vicksburg. The men who hand down these small, funny stories about the boy are the same men who would one day be trying to kill him. But to understand what he was actually being graded on, what the Academy thought it was for, you have to know a secret about this place. West Point, in 1839, was a French school in disguise. 20 years earlier, the War Department had sent that same young New Englander, Sylvanus Thayer, to Europe to study the finest military school on earth, the École Polytechnique in Paris, the academy Napoleon had made into a forge for his officers. Thayer spent 2 years in France, came home, and rebuilt West Point in its image, America's first true college of engineering. He hired as his first professor of engineering a Frenchman named Claudius Crozet, a veteran of Napoleon's own armies. And Thayer built the whole curriculum on 2 pillars, mathematics and the French language, because the textbooks of military science were written in it.
I have put aside my algebra and French and am going to tell you a long story about this prettiest of places, West Point.
2 pillars, mathematics and French. He set them aside to write that letter. Now listen to how Cadet Grant did on each.
Mathematics was very easy to me. In French, my standing was very low. In fact, if the class had been turned the other end foremost, I should have been near head. I never succeeded in getting squarely at either end of my class in any one study during the 4 years.
He was brilliant at the half of the French system that was mathematics and hopeless at the half that was French. He mastered the part that would one day let him move 100,000 men across a continent and failed the part that was only the key to the books. And there is a larger thing in this. The Civil War was fought by men trained in a Frenchman's system. Grant, Longstreet, Buckner, Lee, every one of them learned war at an academy modeled on Napoleon's strategies, taught by one of Napoleon's veterans, on a rock above the Hudson. But hold on to that one exception. Mathematics was very easy to me. It is the one boast in 400 pages of a man who never boasts, and it matters more than it looks. The mind that found numbers effortless, distances, quantities, the plain arithmetic of moving men and supplies from here to there, was the mind that would one day outcalculate every general sent against him. The greatness was already in the room. It was just filed under a subject nobody thought heroic. And here is what he wanted to do with it. Not command armies, not take cities. Ask Sam Grant at 20 what he hoped his life would be, and he will tell you plainly.
My idea then was to get through the course, secure a detail for a few years as assistant professor of mathematics at the academy, and afterwards obtain a permanent position as professor in some respectable college. But circumstances always did shape my course different from my plans.
A mathematics teacher. That was the plan. The man who would one day command every soldier the United States could raise, take Vicksburg and Richmond, accept Robert E. Lee's surrender, and be twice elected President of the United States, wanted more than anything a quiet professorship at a respectable college. Circumstances always did shape my course different from my plans. Hold that sentence. It is the truest thing he ever wrote about himself, and it is the story of the rest of his life. So you can imagine what the furlough meant. Halfway through, after 2 years, the cadets went home for 10 weeks, and his father, who understood his son at least this well, had bought him a young horse to ride for the summer. Of his entire life, this was the stretch Grant singled out.
This I enjoyed beyond any other period of my life. These 10 weeks were shorter than 1 week at West Point.
But first, hear what the Academy itself concluded about him as a soldier. When he came back from that furlough, he found he had been made a cadet sergeant, the first and only rank the place ever gave him. He did not keep it long.
The promotion was too much for me. I was dropped and served the 4th year as a private.
He finished West Point as a private. That was the Army's official verdict on Cadet Grant. Now let me tell you what every man who was actually there remembered about him. There was exactly one thing at West Point Sam Grant did better than any man there, and it is the one thing his own memoir barely mentions. His classmates remembered it their whole lives. The quiet cadet no one noticed became, on horseback, something to see, the finest rider in the Corps. He took the horses the riding masters gave up on. He took York, the animal the others would not mount. There was a witness that day, and he never forgot it. A brand new cadet named James B. Fry, a boy who would himself become a Union general, watched the riding master lift the leaping bar higher than his own head, fix it there, and call a single name, Cadet Grant. Fry watched him turn York, and, in his words, the two of them came thundering down toward the bar, faster, faster, then into the air and over. It seemed as if man and beast had been welded together. The riding master had nothing to add. He said only, "Well done, sir, class dismissed." The height of that jump stood as a West Point record for 25 years. And in the 400 pages Grant wrote about his life, looking back from his deathbed, the man tells you he was mediocre, that he read novels, that he hoped the school would close. He never once tells you he was the best horseman anyone there had ever seen. When someone won't take credit for the one thing he was great at, believe the people who watched. Twice, the great men of the age came to review the cadets. A president, Martin Van Buren, passed down the line and left no mark on him, but the first one did.
I thought him the finest specimen of manhood my eyes had ever beheld, and the most to be envied. I believe I did have a presentiment for a moment that someday I should occupy his place on review, although I had no intention then of remaining in the Army.
That was General Winfield Scott, the towering soldier who would, in a few years, lead an American army into Mexico. Grant did not yet know he would follow him there. Now look around that parade ground. 60 young men were admitted with him in 1839. 21 of them would break under the place and never graduate. Of the 39 who did, 17 would fight for the Union, 13 of them as generals. 3 would become generals of the Confederacy. And here is the fact that ought to stop you cold. Every one of those 3 Confederates was born in the North. Roswell Ripley was an Ohio boy from Grant's own state, and he would stand with the South Carolina militia that fired on Fort Sumter and started the war. The line this country was about to tear itself along did not run neatly down a map. It ran straight through this class. Name a few of them, and you can feel the war coming. William Franklin of Pennsylvania finished first in the class, top of the heap, straight to the engineers. Sam Grant finished 21st. Franklin would become a Union general. History would forget him. There is more to say about Franklin, but it belongs to a darker chapter years from now. Rufus Ingalls, the Maine boy who shared his very first room here, would become Grant's quartermaster, the man who fed and armed his armies, and would be standing at his shoulder at Appomattox at the end of everything. And Frederick Dent of Missouri, his roommate that final year, would fight for him, and would become something closer than a friend. And Grant's closest friend here was a cadet a year ahead of him, a big, easy Southerner named James Longstreet, 3 years together on this plain. 20 years on, Longstreet would be one of the most formidable generals of the Confederacy, and Grant would have to beat him. And one great name was not on this plain with him. Robert E. Lee had graduated 14 years before Grant ever arrived. They were never classmates. In these years, Lee was the Army's celebrated young engineer, and a decade on, he would become the superintendent of this very academy. The ground Sam Grant trained on, Lee would one day command. The two would not stand face to face until a farmhouse called Appomattox. And a cadet a year behind him would matter even more. Simon Bolivar Buckner, a Kentuckian, grew close to Sam Grant here, a friendship that would outlast almost everything the century could throw at it. Years later, when Grant was out of the Army and so broke, he couldn't cover a hotel bill in New York, it was Buckner who quietly paid it. And years after that, the two would meet on opposite sides of a battlefield, where Buckner would have to ask his old friend for terms of surrender, and Grant's reply would give him the name history remembers him by. But that is a long way off. For now they are only cadets and friends. In June 1843, he graduated, 21st in a class of 39. Not the top, not the bottom, exactly the middling place his own account would lead you to expect. He asked for the one branch that used what he was best at.
I was anxious to enter the cavalry, or dragoons as they were then called. I recorded therefore my first choice, dragoons, 2nd, 4th Infantry, and got the latter.
The finest horseman in the Corps was sent to the infantry to march. And there was already somewhere for that infantry to march. The great argument of these years was Texas, whether to pull the breakaway republic into the Union. Everyone understood what annexation meant, more slave territory, and before long, a war with Mexico to take and hold it. So even as Sam Grant pinned on a lieutenant's bars, a clock was already running. The little frontier army he had just joined was about to be pointed south, and the gentle boy who couldn't bear the sight of blood was walking straight toward the first war of his life, one he would come to call deeply unjust. And he left West Point a sick young man. 6 months of a violent cough had wasted him.
For 6 months before graduation, I had had a desperate cough, Tyler's grip it was called, and I was very much reduced, weighing but 117 pounds. There was consumption in my father's family.
He was 21, 117 pounds, in a brand new officer's uniform he was proud of, until a barefoot boy on a Cincinnati street took one look at him.
A little urchin, bareheaded, footed, turned to me and cried, "Soldier, will you work?" "No, sir, E. I'll sell my shirt first."
He said the taste for military uniform never came back. He had wanted, most of all, to be seen. The country had just taught him what it thought a soldier was worth. The sting of it called up an older one. Grant himself in the same breath remembered a boyhood humiliation, the horse trade. Sent as a small boy to buy a neighbor's colt, he had blurted out his father's entire bargaining hand to the seller. Offer 20, then 22.5, then 25, and been laughed at up and down Georgetown for years. It's the same tender, honest thread that runs through the whole man, the horses he loved, and the plain truth he could never help telling, even at his own expense.
So that's where we leave him. 21 years old, a soldier who never wanted to be one, who spent 4 years trying to get out, and walked out the gate a private, and quietly, without ever once mentioning it, the finest horseman anyone at West Point had ever seen. Circumstances, he wrote, always did shape his course different from his plans, and he had no idea how right he was. Because the Army is about to send him to a quiet post outside St. Louis, where he discovers a farm called White Haven and his roommate's sister. Next time, the farm across the river and the woman who changed the course of his life. Thank you for spending this time with us, and if you like this episode, please like and subscribe.